So I'll take you through the epidemiology of celiac disease and how celiac is there in all over the world. I declare no conflict of interest. So celiac disease, we know, is an old disease. It was thought to be present only in the Western Europe in early part of this century, but later it was seen only by pediatricians. While we knew the treatment of this disease, that gluten-free food is the treatment for celiac disease, but we didn't know how well to diagnose this disease. So what happened in later, in that there have been increasing recognition of this disease all around the world, mainly in those countries who have mainly Caucasian population. And there were three reasons for that, that the criteria for diagnosing celiac disease have improved. Earlier required 3 biopsies, later 1 biopsy. The advent of serology for making diagnosis, and also earlier it's seen only by pediatricians, but later it was seen all by adult physicians who see adult patients too. And that's a very important part which led to recurrent celiac disease all around the world. So there have been change in the epidemiology of celiac disease, and the 3 reasons I just enumerated, that more awareness about celiac disease around the world. So to look at this epidemiology, we did a meta-analysis of all the published papers in the epidemiology of celiac disease in the population, and systematic review and meta-analysis. And what we found that of these number of studies, 3,800 studies, and in this meta-analysis we include 96 articles. One important thing was that in this meta-analysis we included only those studies in whom biopsy were done in at least 50% of those patients who had a serology positive. What we found, look at 2 ways. What is the seroprevalence of celiac disease around the world? And what we observed in this 96 studies involving more than 275,000 patients, that 1.3% of global population have serology positive, 1.37%. Certainly, it varied from 0 to 11% in different countries. More important, there will be a lot of heterogeneity in these studies. And if you look at prevalent celiac disease, it means serology positive and biopsy showing villus atrophy, then there's a global prevalence of celiac disease, and it shows in 57 studies involving 138,000 subjects, 0.68% of global population have biopsy-confirmed celiac disease. And if we convert these numbers into real numbers, we find there's a lot of difference in this, that serology is 1.37%, biopsy confirmed is 0.66%. What could be reasons for that? There could be 2 reasons, that many of them may have potential celiac disease. They are just antibody positive, but they have not developed enteropathy till then. Further, many could be false positive. We know the serology is not always correct. Serology at low titer may be falsely positive. And more important, in this meta-analysis we included only those subjects or those studies where at least 50% of patients have been biopsied. So if you look at this statistics, then what could be number of patients with celiac disease around the world? So looking at 0.68% of prevalent celiac disease in the globe with 7.4 billion population, we expect that 37 to 59 million people in the world will have celiac disease. So this is a really global problem. More importantly, that everyone is not diagnosed. Majority, almost 80% of patients are still not diagnosed. That's true around the world. Certainly, there's a more awareness in Europe and North America. Certainly, the diagnosis rate is increasing, but many parts of the world that celiac disease is still not recognized so well. So look at now going to the data on what is the continent-wise, what is the prevalence in different continents. And if you look at the most studies has come from Europe involving 163,000 subjects, and seroprevalence is 1.3%, and biopsy confirmed celiac is 0.8%. And to look at better in this cartoon, that in Europe, the seroprevalence is 1.3%, and biopsy confirmed celiac is present in 0.8%. Coming to North America, seroprevalence is 1.4%, and biopsy confirmed celiac 0.5%. In South America, seroprevalence 1.3%, and biopsy confirmed celiac 0.3%. In Africa, 1.1 seroprevalence, and biopsy-confirmed celiac 0.8. And in Asia, where celiac, in Australia, 1.4% seroprevalence, 0.5% biopsy-confirmed celiac disease. But in Asia, where celiac is thought not to be there at all, seroprevalence is 1.8%, where biopsy-confirmed celiac is 0.6%. Furthermore, if you look at the data from all the countries, and if you look at 10 most populous countries in the world, we have data on population data only from a few countries, that's India, US, Brazil, and Russia. But we don't have data from those countries which have large population, including China, Indonesia. But there's no study available from these countries. Furthermore, if you look at the countrywide prevalence of celiac disease, and what we observed, and what we did, that put all the countries into percentile, I mean highest percentile and the lowest percentile, and the color code, the more deep colors, there's the highest percentile of either seroprevalence or celiac disease. First look at the seroprevalence. So highest quartile of celiac disease was observed in countries which are Algeria, Czech Republic, India, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Portugal, and Turkey. And lowest prevalence were seen, the seroprevalence seen in Estonia, Germany, Iceland, Poland, Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain. Same if you go to looking at prevalence of celiac disease in different countries. Again, those countries which have the highest prevalence of celiac disease were Argentina, Egypt, Hungary, Finland, India, New Zealand, and Sweden. And lowest prevalence was seen in the countries which were Brazil, Germany, Russia, and Tunisia. Also, there was a question that the celiac disease is more common in children. Again, this meta-analysis further confirmed that celiac disease is more common in children compared to adults. The prevalence in children is 0.9%, and adults is 0.5%. So almost a twofold difference in the prevalence of celiac disease in children and adults. So first summary, that celiac disease is truly a global disease, and 1.3% of global population have a seroprevalence of celiac disease. They have serology positive, and 0.68% of global population is expected to have a biopsy-confirmed celiac disease. And this is truly underestimation because in this meta-analysis we have not included all the studies where biopsy was not done. So that what is the trend of celiac? Is it we have achieved a plateau or we have still emerging? So there are two contexts, that in those countries where celiac is known for many decades, in those countries have the prevalence of celiac disease has plateaued or still evolving, and there are many other countries or continents where celiac was thought not to be there at all. Is there celiac in those continents and countries? So in this meta-analysis, again, we divided those studies which were between 91 to December 2000 and 2000 onwards. And we took 91 because this is the first time that we had a diagnostic criteria of celiac disease that is laid down in 1991. And we look at two periods. In 1999 to 2000, the prevalence was 0.6% biopsy-confirmed celiac disease, but later, 1 decade later, the prevalence is 0.8%. It means there have been increase in prevalence of celiac disease around the world. And looking into two studies, one from Finland and one from US. There are many other studies, but look at Finland, the prevalence of celiac disease have increased almost twofold over 2 decades. Same in US, the prevalence have increased by 4-folds over almost 4 decades. So why there is a rise in prevalence of celiac disease? To my mind, the most important is awareness about this disease around the world. And this is the most important factor which probably led to recurrent celiac disease in many countries and many continents. Certainly there was advancement in diagnostic tools. There have been countries or continents where rice is the predominant food, but now wheat is being inducted in their diet. So summary two, that in many countries, the prevalence of celiac disease have increased 2 to 4 folds over the last 2 to 3 decades. Now coming to a snapshot of celiac in Europe, the most European countries celiac is well recognized. But there's one country, that is Germany, where celiac disease is thought to be less common. And this is a 4-country studies done in Finland, UK, Germany. And they found that in Germany, the celiac disease prevalence was lowest. But this is a study published about 2 years back, which confirms that even in Germans, this is a study involving almost 12,000 children or adolescents, they found that seroprevalence is 0.8%, unlike the previous study. So even in Germany, celiac disease is not uncommon. Coming to Russia, there's no many population-based studies, and we know it is a big country. Although celiac is known in many studies, but again, there's lack of data which is population-based. Coming to Sub-Sahara, the study this is an interesting study that in Algeria, the prevalence of celiac disease is the highest, almost 5%, which is the highest in the world. And the reason is that they have more gluten intake, and also the population prevalence of HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 is very high. Now coming to Asia. Asia, celiac disease thought to be very, very uncommon. And this is the map of celiac disease in Asia, published in 2009. And you find that in most places, you find this brown, purple, that's unknown, except for Australia, celiac disease. But majority of Asia, celiac was really not known. But later, in India, our physician would see celiac less often, mainly pediatricians. But recently, for the last about 15 years or so, we started recognizing celiac disease in India. And our question was, how common is celiac in India? The first where I work is in northern part of India, that's in New Delhi. And we did a population-based study around Delhi. And what we found in a study of almost 2,800 blood subjects which are healthy, that prevalence of celiac disease is about 1% in this population. No celiac to 1% population in this part of the world. Then the 3 other studies which suggest that celiac disease is about 1%, varying from 0.3 to 1% in India. More importantly, that most physicians in India believe that celiac disease is a disease of northern part of India, and does not occur in southern part of India and northeastern part of India. And somebody defined that this is a northern part of India, which is called celiac belt. Celiac occurs in this part of India. We were not really convinced about this, and we wanted to know why it is so. Is it a dietary factor, or it is a genetic susceptibility in Indian population? So let me give you an idea about Indian population. India certainly is a big country, but it has 3 main population. One is Aryan, which are there in northern part of India. Then we have a southern part of India, which is Dravidians, and in northeast part of India, which are Indo-Burman. There are 3 population in this country. So we wanted to look at the population. Is there difference in prevalence of celiac disease in these 3 parts? And if so, what could be difference? So we did a study involving 32,000 subjects and involving 23,000 blood sample testing. And what we found that 0.6% of Indians have either potential or celiac disease. More importantly, if you divide into 3 different populations, what we find in northern part of India, the prevalence is 1.2 of celiac and potential celiac disease, 1.2. In northeast is 0.87, not much difference, but the southern part of India is almost tenfold low, 0.1% had either celiac or potential celiac disease. We want to look at what the difference, why it is so. So we looked at 2 factors, the population prevalence of HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 in this population, all 3 population, and the dietary intake in them, how much gluten they eat in their diet. So HLA-DQ2, DQ8 is equal in all 3 populations, is almost similar. But dietary intake, northern part of India, the wheat intake wheat is a staple food, and the wheat intake is extremely high, almost 400 gram wheat per day, which amount to about 25 grams of gluten per day. whereas in southern part and northeast part of India, rice is the main food and gluten intake is much less. So probably the amount of gluten intake is the cause of difference in these three populations. Interestingly, a similar study, a very interesting study was done in US where 400,000 biopsies which were sent to a pathology lab were reviewed. And anybody who had a villus atrophy was considered to be a marker of celiac disease. And what they observed, very interesting, that the prevalence of celiac disease in US, the South Indian staying in the US was almost nil. What we observed in India too is as similar, that there were 177 South Indians staying in the US and none had celiac disease. And that's true with East Asian also, the prevalence is 0.15. More importantly, we say celiac disease is northern part of India, very common, and the Punjab is a province which is there in northern part of India, very interesting state, and there in Punjabis, the prevalence of celiac disease in Punjabis staying in the US had the highest prevalence of celiac disease, almost 3%, compared to overall 1.7% in Americans. So why it is so? Is it a genetic factor or it is a wheat consumption? I don't think we have a final answer on that. Now coming to other country in Asia, in China. People believe celiac disease in China. No celiac in China. And you ask your colleagues in China, we have many colleagues, Chinese colleagues, we ask celiac disease, oh, we don't have celiac disease at all. Nobody will investigate for celiac disease. But over the last about 10 years, there are certain studies available. They are all small case reports, few patients. But interestingly, last year, a study was published involving 19,000 Chinese adolescents and young adults. And they found that seroprevalence in this population is 2%. They're not biopsied, they're one serology positive, is too high. Certainly, many of them would be potential celiac, many may be false positive, but 2% prevalence of celiac, serology positive in Chinese is remarkable. So it may break the dogma that celiac disease does not occur in China. And furthermore, there's studies published this year, last month, that 246 IBS patients who were looked for celiac disease. So they were serology were done, and subsequently the biopsy were done in them. And they found that in IBS patients in China, 2.8% had celiac disease. It confirms that celiac is not uncommon in China. I know how common it is, but certainly many Chinese have celiac disease. But you ask Chinese colleagues there, they won't investigate for celiac at this point of time. Coming to other country, Japan, there are many small case reports of celiac disease in Japan, and one study from Japan in IBD patients, and they found that in IBD patients, the seroprevalence of celiac disease was quite high, almost 13% of IBD in Japan are seropositive for celiac disease. And many of them were put on gluten-free food, and in them, symptoms improved and serology became negative. Other country in Asia, Malaysia. Again, people believe no celiac. So I could convince one of my colleagues, KL Go, to do a small study. And what he did, they studied 500 medical students, his own students, and did blood tests in them. And he found that total about 1.2% in Malaysia, the young students are seropositive. Malaysia is a country where has all three populations. Malaysia has Malays, local Malaysians, Chinese and Indians. And even look at in Chinese, staying in Malaysia had 1.7% of Chinese staying in Malaysia were seropositive. So give you a total summary in many Asian countries. Look at India, celiac disease is now well recognized, and almost we expect that 6 to 8 million Indians will have celiac disease. It's a huge number. In Malaysia, seroprevalence is 1.5%, 1.2%. Coming to Turkey, again, this is a biopsy-confirmed celiac disease. varying from 0.4 to 1%. In Iran, celiac well 0.5% roughly. In Saudi Arabia, through 2% seroprevalence and biopsy confirmed in 1.5%. And also in Israel, 0.6% biopsy confirmed celiac disease. In many other parts of many other Asian countries, there are no population-based report, but you find there are many small case studies from these countries. And there are many countries in Asia from where there are no single case report available. So we did, again, meta-analysis of all the Asian studies to look at what is the prevalence of celiac disease in Asia. And what we observed that the seroprevalence is 1.5% in Asia, which was confirmed later in our bigger study. And also, the biopsy of celiac was 0.4%. So looking at Asia in total, Asia, 50 countries, 60% of world population, 4.2 billion. And two largest countries, China and India. And if you combine together, the number of celiac in Asia, in China and India could be equal to celiac disease all around the world. But again, celiac disease in China is still to be recognized. And we expect that in coming decade, the number of celiac in Asia will increase markedly. And we need to understand the epidemiology of celiac disease in Asia. So what do we predict, and this prediction in Asia, what will happen? Look at two important factors, HLA-DQ2, population prevalence, and wheat intake. Globally, the wheat intake have increased over these decades, which shows that wheat intake has increased markedly all around the world. Look at wheat consumption pattern in Asia. High, it's not low. Even in China, where we believe the celiac disease is not there, the wheat intake is quite almost 75 to 150 gram per person per year is large. And we look at many Asian countries, the wheat intake is not low. Even in Japan, the wheat intake is rising over decades. Furthermore, in China, the wheat intake has really increased. And if you give you some statistics, the rural household wheat intake per year is about 60 kgs, which is equal to rest of the world. Interesting thing is that the wheat intake in China is more in the northern part of China, and in southern part of China is more rice rather than wheat. And also, so furthermore, there have been increase in wheat intake because wheat adds to convenience food. So wheat intake have really increased in terms of bread, pasta, pizza, burger, which are not the normal food in many Asian countries. These food is now available in even in small villages of these countries in Asia. Second part, that do this population have a DQ2 DQ8 in the population? And look at these countries, China, India, Malaysia, all these countries, the DQ2 prevalence is not low. So these populations are predisposed to develop celiac disease. They are predisposed, they are taking wheat, therefore they might have celiac disease. We need to recognize this fact. Interesting, people believe that Chinese have no DQ2, DQ8, but this is a meta-analysis published about 4 years back, and so that in northern part of China, where the wheat intake is high, the population prevalence of HLA-DQ2 is about 20%, like the rest of the world. Therefore, both initial report and predictions suggest that celiac disease is going to rise in many Asian countries. So why do we don't recognize, if it's so, why don't we recognize? And single most important is belief, that people believe that celiac does not occur in Asia. Lack of diagnostic test and very high threshold of suspicion. You don't suspect, therefore you don't diagnose them. And to make looking at this, that what is celiac disease in Asia, and this is the World Gastroenterology Organization and Asia Pacific Association of Gastroenterology had a joint statement. and raise the issues with celiac disease in Asia, where Dr. Mulder, Knut Lunden were the part of it. And single most important point we made that we should increase awareness of celiac disease in many Asian countries, both among patients and amongst clinicians. So in summary, celiac disease is truly a global disease, and 1.3% of global population are seropositive for celiac antibodies. 0.6% of global population have biopsy-confirmed celiac disease, and this is an underestimation. Celiac disease has increased over the last 2 to 3 decades in many, many countries, and Asia is at center stage of celiac in this decade. And certainly with the different population differences in the prevalence in 3 different parts of the country, India is an important country to really look at, find out what are the causes or differences in the prevalence of celiac disease in this part. And this is my team on celiac. And this is a painting which I love to show to you. This is a painting was done by Sankha Samant, a very renowned painter, and this was painted in the last Congress of Celiac Disease, which I held in New Delhi. Thank you for your attention.